right, hello everybody and welcome to Key Culture Podcast. This is Matei Georgiou and as always I'm co-hosting this with
Niilo Tarnonen. Nice to meet you everyone.
Hi Niilo. And today we have a special guest for you. We have Vahid Hosseini, who is from Iran and he's a composer. And by the way, like how I never really know, am I supposed to say Persian or am I supposed to say Iranian?
You can say anything you like.
I can see, okay. So he's a composer and I think a setar player and improviser and conductor, and he's going to tell you more about himself soon. So how about we start with that? Like, tell us a bit about yourself. And you come from a place where we know very little. So can you tell us both about your relationship to Western music and the music from your own country in this introduction?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to your podcast. There is this general concept about the East in general, to the Western eye, as something exotic. Well, I always try to kind of give complementary insight to this exotism by saying that, come on, we're just like you, we're nothing special. I mean, we are all either special or not. I mean, we're all equal. My whole journey probably starts as a musician, starts from this, that my identity as a Iranian or Persian who has also lived so long with the English language. I spent some part of my life just perfecting my British accent, and I don't know why. And someone who also has lived long enough in Italy who wants to express some things in Italian without knowing. I just want to start from this point that we're talking about human being in general. There is nothing exotic in this world. Everything is as normal, as human as they are. And I personally think that exotism, which is something that you can trace back to 19th century, even Brahms, or even before that, Goethe or stuff like that. They were, of course, enchanted with I don't know, Hafez as a poet, or I don't know, so many other things. I don't know, the fables, those imaginary scenes of the Sultan, of the harem, or all that thing. All the other, the sexy other who's been there all the time, for all of us, also for us, for any culture. There is this. When you get to know each other, you will understand that it's just someone like us. So that's what I've learned as an Iranian young person who came to Europe.
Let's just punctually say also some things for the listeners to understand. Like, so what is your like background? So just say what you studied, where you lived.
Yeah, I was born in Tehran. I grew up in a little city called Damavand, which is quite close to Tehran. I came back to Tehran and when I was 10. I started music with Persian music with this instrument called setar. And it is something like a lute, a small lute.
So is it a traditional Iranian instrument?
Yes, it's one of the main classical Iranian instruments on which you would play the radif, which is one part of the classical Persian music. I learned almost all the radif with quite significant teachers like Masoud Shoari or even Hossein Alizadeh. They are people who are of great importance in Iranian classical music.
Okay, so you started as a setar player when you were 10, and then what?
No, not 10, maybe 16.
Okay.
Was not. Actually, this could be also interesting. My family is actually a religious family and quite unfamiliar with the world of music in general. So, but we were full of, our house was full of art. My mother used to weave rugs, Persian rugs. And
Okay.
I used to live with all these colors. But anyway, my mother later became a writer, and I became a composer and setar player. But yeah, the interesting thing is, in general, the religious, or let's say the more traditional part of the society used to be at my time, were quite unfamiliar with music and music education for a child. So for me, it was quite something very new. I mean, I wanted to become a professional footballer, and then I saw that I can't because I didn't have the self-esteem. And then I found this instrument at my cousin's house, and I said, "Wow, what is this?" It sounds, and wow, it's very interesting. And then I went to. Also, we lived in a place where playing an instrument was quite. I mean, maybe 1 out of 1,000.
So it was very rare.
Yeah, but it was one part of the city which was like, I'm again talking about in the 80s, 90s. It was the south part of Tehran, and it was quite for a poor neighborhood. And then there was this slaughterhouse next to it, which was stinking big slaughterhouse, and used to be a problem for almost 100 years. And then some new mayor just came and built a culture center instead of that slaughterhouse. And then I was one of the first fruits of that culture center. So you see, what I am going to talk to you later about all the reform and where the hope lies in the Iranian society is actually starts from here. This little change, which was not little at all. I mean, that guy had to face so much trouble. Yeah, I started at 16. I worked with some private teachers. They were all like important masters, mostly important masters. Then I got interested in Western music through, again, some religious stuff, because I was enchanted with religious music like Bach and Mozart.
So you mean stuff like cantatas, requiem, mass? Okay.
I fell in love with the Requiem, especially Mozart's Requiem, and Bach's Saint Matthew's.
Yes, that's very interesting. I would have never thought that they listen in Iran to, let's say, religious Christian classical music.
Absolutely, yes, we do. And well, there is this. These are the little spots nobody would guess. There is this very old music store called Beethoven in Tehran, and we used to go and get our kind of particular kind of music that we used to listen as. And yeah, that was a source of access to the culture, to the other culture. And yeah, at that time there were the cassettes and the CDs. Made me very interested. I dreamed of playing the piano. I was obviously poor, but later I met my wife, and we decided to. Well, we got married as a means to.
How old were you then? Can I ask?
We started to live together actually when we were 22 or 3.
22.
Yeah, and we bought our first piano with the gifts we got from the wedding. And it's interesting, as a teenager, what I fantasized about playing the piano was not the Turkish march of it. I fantasized playing the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony on the piano. Even if I don't have even if it's very interesting how I looked at it. If you're interested, I can tell you. I said, even if I don't have a teacher, I can decipher this, like finding each of these notes, and it would take me, I don't know, 6 months maybe to play 2 bars, but it is worth it. Come on. I wish I could do it. I mean, this is the kind of thing which I was aspiring, which I was like fantasizing about. But then again, we bought our piano. We had a very good teacher who taught us piano as a means to learn music rather than to become pianists.
Right, right. So you didn't. So at that point, when you were 22 or so, you had training in the setar playing, and were you a professional player by that time, or?
Almost, yeah. I had done some concerts. I started some years later. I started this Persian music ensemble as the director of the Persian music ensemble in Arasbaran Music in a cultural center, which is one of the important cultural centers in Tehran. And by that time, I was already, let's say, established as a.
Okay, so then you get interested into classical music. You start playing a piano, and then and all this time you studied privately
Yeah.
music, right?
At the time, I mean, it was my age to enter university. I asked my teachers, how about I go to the university to study music? And all my teachers discouraged me. Well,
Really?
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
why?
at that time, I was more, I mean, it was more probable for me to study Persian music at the university. And they discouraged me on the basis that nothing's happening there. You want to learn Persian music, you have to learn it the old way. They're going to give you some subjects like theology, some like, of course, theology is not important. I mean, some stuff like, I don't know, the languages, blah, 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 something irrelevant to music, and some things which are relevant to music. But again, there is a huge crisis about like the music theory which is being taught in general. As you know, my points on music theory, when we talk about music theory and intervals and everything, there is a real crisis about what you define an interval, major third.
So you mean that at the university they're teaching in a way that would be, let's say, counter to the old ways of learning this Persian music, or?
Well, I can say that. Well, again, I'm talking about that time. I'm quite familiar with how things are now, but I'd rather talk for now. I'd rather talk about that time.
Okay.
The teachers, the quality of the teachers, and the curriculum in general, at least as far as the Persian music goes, was really not what one would expect, and really not what one would need as a Persian musician. You would study classical harmony. Why? Why should you study classical harmony? Of course, I love classical harmony. And now I understand that all I learned as classical harmony was rubbish. You have to learn it in style, not just harmony in abstract. But anyway, what I'm saying, okay, even if we accept that harmony is a set of rules and blah blah blah, why should someone who's studying Persian music learn?
So, but the curriculum was including mostly things that that were irrelevant to what you really needed in order to become a professional musician in the Persian tradition of classical music.
Well,
is this what you mean basically?
What I can say, to be fair enough, is that academy, in its nature, as a set of classrooms and a bunch of teachers and a system of credits and all, would really destroy the soul of the Persian music tradition.
Yeah, so you mean, yeah, so it kind of doesn't work to study academic folk. Yeah, whereas you want to study folk as it really is.
Well, yeah, we will go back to the folk and non-folk stuff. But if you're talking about folk, absolutely. I mean, I know folk, which is...
Yeah, sorry, I said folk. I should have said Iranian classical music.
Yeah, it's classical, Persian classical music. Look, if you want to study folk in Iran, I would really suggest that you just... I would buy you a couple of bus tickets, and we would go to this little village, and I would show you this old man who's a farmer, and I'd say just study here. I mean, stay here for a year, do the farm work, and study with him. That's the best way to learn folk music. Forget about the academy, the books, and blah 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 blah. The whole book is there. This guy breathes folk music. So in that respect, I am more against academism as folk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still talking about my own country. I don't
Sure,
really
sure.
talk about any other structure of, for example, I know that the Sibelius Academy, the folk music department is quite a strong one. But I'm still talking about that. There are so many people now interested and there is this, I think it's been 10 years that they have this ethnomusicology as part of the music education in the university in Iran. And there are so many people who are interested. They go, they do research. There have been researches for, I guess, 100 years in Iran about folk music with different perspectives. So many of them are so interesting. About classical music, Persian classical music, there has been a structure of the old style craftsmanship, because music in its current form is the reminiscent of the time that the musician was part of the servants of the court. And the servants of the court, not only the cook or the janitor, but also those artisans, those craftsmen,
Mm-hmm.
have their own shop, have their own workshop, and they would carve out their art. And this court gave them some kind of support. As far as you were a court musician, you could have it. I guess it's the same thing in every civilization. You have some entity of power, and there are so many fragile craftsmanships that need this support. They are so important that that entity of power, call it church or court or republic or whatever, contains it. No, in a way owns it. But what happens within that, as far as us individuals, as musicians are concerned, is that me as a pupil would go to this maestro, and he would say, okay, do as I do. No, not like this. Do as I do. So I wouldn't bother learning about music theory or whatever.
Yes, or tonal harmony or anything like that. Yeah.
It is important to know, of course, but once you are formed. By the way, I forgot to mention that there's also this youth conservatory in Iran. But at my time again, when I got to know that I want to do music, it was already late. And what happens there again is under a lot of scrutiny, because especially in Persian music, almost the same procedure happens. There have been some modernization of, let's say, in the beginning of the 20th century, an introduction of this. Before the conservatory, there was this school. Let's call it crafts school. Darul Funun. It's like fan it means a technique. It means the place where you would learn the technique, but technique means the craftsmanship, the craft. So it used to be a school of crafts, but then they turned it into conservatorio, and everything became kind of westernized.
Right. So this is actually something I wanted to ask. So the Persian classical music, if you would go to these private teachers and not go to the university as you wanted to do,
yeah,
is that mostly oral tradition, or like you learned by playing, or do you also write things and study them and?
Yeah, nowadays again it depends from master to master. My experience, I followed the path of the conservatory, that was study books, which are all notated and everything. And they are in a way counterintuitive, because by the time you finish those books and you want to start to play the radif, you can't, because you have learned so far, okay, 1 and 2 and 3, and then they tell you, now play this. So, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay, so the kind of the standardized curriculum of the conservatoires doesn't actually provide you with all the skills specific to the real music in the Persian tradition that it should. Is this what you mean?
It does, because anyway, there are very high pedigree musicians teaching in the conservatory, also in universities these days. But and they are all doing what is happening, like in Italy, with my composition teachers, who have lost an old system, and they are forced into a new system. What they are doing is just taking the advantage of what is being proposed as the academia or as the conservatory or anything. That is the protection again, new kind of protection. But anyway, this protection is also telling you, no, do this and this and this, and then this. But the teacher might not take it.
So, okay, so then now we are at, let's say, 22, 20 something. You were already a performer. You started getting attracted to classical music. And how did you get into studying Western music? And how did you get to Italy and to Finland?
Well, that's also a very interesting story, but yeah, to cut it short, we bought the piano, as I said. We looked for a teacher. He said, I don't have time. I said, okay, I'll change my job so that I will fit your time schedule. And yeah, it became something serious for me. I played the piano together with my wife, with the same teacher. And to our fortune, he was a pedagogue. He had studied in Paris and Switzerland, composition and pedagogy. So he really knew how to teach us with that position.
So now we're still in Iran, right?
Yeah. We went to his basement studio for 8 years. We were quite...
How many years?
8 years.
8 years, okay.
Yeah.
So in those 8 years, you learned mostly to play piano, or did you learn something else?
No, piano.
Piano, okay.
But he taught me also. I mean, his class was everything. We started with piano, obviously, but then when we came to playing, like, I don't know, Bach, we started talking about counterpoint, Mozart, okay, harmony, what is harmony?
Okay, so you learn little by little also the tools of the classical Western music. Yeah.
It was really a very comprehensive years. Well, it also led to some collaborations. He was also a researcher. He made a movie about the first French guy who came to Iran to make. This could be interesting to you, actually. Jean-Baptiste Lemaire in 1880 something, if I'm not, or 70 something. He came to Iran as part of the military reforms to make the first marching band. And that was the beginning of academic musical education in Iran, as far as the Western music is. Mm-hmm. So this is the beginning. And he made a movie about him. His movie is called A French Musician in the Qajar Court. Yeah, I wrote a piece, but I mean, he gave me a text which has remained from those times as a street music. It was a song, but the song is lost. Only the text is remaining. So I made a kind of street song, in the style of those days. It was a very interesting collaboration. But anyway, it ended up, and then I decided to go to Italy. Sorry, I have to mention this also. In 2014 or 15, I started this thing called the inter-orchestra project. Meeting Nader Mashayekhi, who's a quite well-known composer and conductor. He worked and lived in Vienna for 30 years. It's been 10 years that he's back in Iran. So the idea there was to actually make these two worlds of Persian music and classical music not fuse, not a fusion, but make them sit together.
Meet, yeah.
Not even meet, because there was this very interesting Indian composer. I forgot his name. When you say they're gonna meet, it's like there is a kind of estrangement, no? And they're gonna meet, and they're gonna say, "Okay, let's."
No, but I mean, like they wanted to put it in the same place. Like
I know what you mean.
we go into semantics now, so.
I think these are actually interesting semantics. So I would like love to hear actually Vahid's point about this.
Yeah, you know why? Because East meets West, fusion, world music, all these things are so much repeated that they are giving the whole world, and even so many of my colleagues as Eastern or non-Western musicians, the wrong idea. That, for example, when you're playing your oud or your setar or your I don't know, whatever, and you want to be part of a global context, you have to conform, no? Okay, your major third should be a bit higher so that you conform with the piano, because we can't down tune the piano. Well, this is not true. This is not a contemporary approach. And for us, the inter-orchestra was the contemporary approach of do not touch the folk, do not change how this thing is in any of its nature. And obviously the classical symphonic orchestra as it was. We don't change that either. But what we do is we make people listen to two music at the same time. We don't have to make them one music. It is a bit unthinkable maybe, but we did it.
So what do you mean in the same time? Like first one piece, one classical piece?
No. Together. As one orchestra.
So that the kind of two traditions are coexisting on the same time, without need to conform to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is actually very interesting. I think. Are there some kind of links to some recordings of those projects? Do you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, the story of inter-orchestra met with so many big unfortunate things like Mr. Donald Trump and sanctions and so on. So in 2000, after 2 years of intense work, I really put my life on this orchestra. And it was really difficult. I really did everything out of zero. We had no budgets, no grants, really we did everything from ground zero. To make an orchestra, you know what it is. But it came up with a halt. There are so, I mean, we did like I think 6 or 7 concerts. We did 3 or 4 sold outs. We made the best, the most important TV show at that time. It's called Khandevane. Me and Nader Mashayekhi, we went there and we present. And it is quite rare for the religious government's official TV channel to introduce like an orchestra people.
Yes.
Orchestra. So these are all the nuances I'm talking about that people wouldn't get from afar. These are things that are happening. What I'm trying to say is really, yeah, we made it up to a point, but then it also coincided with my studying in Italy. So it came with a big halt. we had a few concerts, but what I wanted to say was that I'm trying to do it again. I mean, to take it back on the track, and especially seeing the possibilities here in Finland, which I'm very happy about. I'm really thankful for what has been given to me, Taike, Sibelius Academy, Musique Italo, I don't know, Zakros Ensemble.
But sorry, so in Italy you studied composition when?
In
Or what? 2000?
2017.
2007. Okay, and you did what there? A master's, a bachelor? What did you do?
That's also an interesting point. I studied as my academic stuff. I studied English literature in Iran when I was 20, 19.
Okay, and then
When I went to Italy, I decided to start again from bachelor because it would buy me more time to be more with my teachers. I haven't actually graduated from bachelor's because this year I'm going to, I mean, in a few months probably I will graduate. Yeah.
in Italy you studied composition, like classical, Western.
Yes.
Okay.
I started composition. Sorry, just to answer your question. Yeah, there are no videos yet of the inter-orchestra, but I'm beginning to make up the site and all the videos so that you can see the...
We were at your studies in Italy. You studied classical music, Western. Then what?
Yeah, I studied with Paolo Ralla, and he was, I mean, we call it Western contemporary music, but, well, he was very, very, very open in the fact that I am from another culture and I have my own language and blah, blah, blah. So he insisted that I study like Bach and everything, but and he was quite adamant on it. But he also let me find my own way in composition. He never told me like you have to write like this. He never tells anyone you have to do like this. He's a fantastic teacher, really fantastic teacher. He really helped me without even telling me how to. He helped me find a way to start writing.
Okay, and then you came to Helsinki, I guess, was your next destination.
It was an Erasmus exchange period. I studied with Veli-Matti Pumala. I really enjoyed his classes.
All right. So, but the point is that you have a background in this classical Iranian music. Now you have a background in composition, and you also play piano. So you have, let's say, a overarching picture of both Iranian classical music and Western classical music. So let's go from there. No, I mean some things were discussed already, but what if Nilo takes the next question?
If you could kind of compare the Western classical tradition and the Persian classical tradition, you already earlier mentioned that through the history they have been supported by, for example, courts or churches or so on. So I would actually be more interested to hear from you about the particularities of the Persian tradition and also its relationship to the power hierarchies of the society today in Iran, and then also from the kind of practical musical side, what are the main let's say differences and main similarities that you would say between, let's say, for example, the European tradition, if you can lump it as one. Of course it's diverse also internally, and then the Persian classical music.
Yeah, in a very general comparison, I can say that the court and the master musician's workshop, yeah, you could compare it to Mozart's private lessons or Haydn's lessons to Beethoven or something like that. Well, we know, for example, that Mozart dined with the janitors. So that's the kind of hierarchy. I mean, that's the place in the hierarchy we're talking about in the musician. The same thing almost in the court system happened. When we go to the modern world, I can see again some kind of similarity. Obviously, very different in proportion, but perhaps a bit similar in nature. That is how tradition was arrogated into a modernized pipe system of, I don't know, power, if you like. I mean,
But
well,
when you mean modern, you mean like now, today, or
let's say 20th century.
20th century? Okay.
For example, I think one of the great institutions that happened to exist through history in Europe was the Conservatorio, which, well, we know as, which was part of the church, and it was first for the conserving the little orphans not to go to be beggars or prostitutes. Just they would come to the opera or something, or the oratorio or whatever, and then this became a kind of structure for the tradition to be transmitted. The thing about Persian music, however, is that at some point there was this guy who everybody now calls the father of the modern Iranian music, who studied in France, if I'm not mistaken, and he came back with a lot of new ideas on how music should be taught and should be looked at, and he took so many of the, we're talking 1920s, if I'm not, and he built the foundations of the, let's say, classical music through Western music theory. Like, he even proposed a 24 equal division system, which obviously didn't work at all for interpreting the microtones. Nobody accepted it. In practice, it didn't work because it was out of the nature of the music. But anyway, it was there, or it is still there in some of the conservatory books. So, well, my point was, maybe you see this similarity in nature, that we have some kind of tradition coming from the past, but because of the crisis of not in the negative sense, but crisis of paradigm change. Like,
of what change?
Paradigm change.
A paradigm change, yeah.
Of like a court system into a republic, or like the old age into modern, whatever you call it. Because of this paradigm change, there is a need to somehow take this tradition and
put it somewhere.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the way it has been treated, I think, can tell us a bit about how things are going. Like, I know that you're interested in, as you asked me before, in how classical music or Persian music is taught in Iran nowadays. We have to trace it back to this kind of schism, no? This moment when you have to find a new way. There is a point where the old way doesn't work, and you have to find a new way. And the new way is already old now, in many other cases. Yeah.
What do you mean the old way is new way with classical music in Iran?
Well,
the new way is already old.
Yeah. About Persian classical or Western classical?
You said Western classical, no?
I meant both, but I can talk for each. Well, the old way, the new way, which is already old, about Persian music is that, okay, well, the Persian music was reintroduced or defined through a version of music theory which is already expired. Like, at that point, I mean, the way they interpreted meter, the way they interpreted intervals, the way he interpreted many things were even wrong. Nowadays they look at things differently. The same thing could be applied about classical music, which is even worse, because when we are talking about classical music, there are so many so many young people in Iran who are fascinated with the violin. I worked with them in the orchestra, and they are so talented. They are so full of life, full of this. How can I say?
Okay, and
Yeah.
what's the problem?
Is that they have to enter in this system, this new way, which is like, I don't know, 100 something years old, which is already expired. There is so much, uh, so many things which are neglected in the culture, in the transmission of the traditional Western music, and they are all missed through. They're all lost through the book.
Can you give an example of something that is already old and in classical music, so that we could understand, like something that could be taught differently, but it isn't?
Absolutely. For example, imagine this friend of mine who is trying to play a Mozart concerto. At some point, the teacher says something like, "Your vibrato should be like this," or I don't know, this mordent should be played like this, or I don't know, don't change the tempo, or I don't know, keep the same rhythm.
All right.
These things as rules, no?
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask myself, but where do these rules come from? Actually, I've never seen these rules when I was here in the in the heart of the tradition itself. So the soul of each language it's exactly like when you want to teach like English in Africa, and someone is interested to learn English literature, and then there is a problem. Up to some point, the grammar books can tell you something, but for understanding Shakespeare, you have to go beyond that. No, what I'm trying to say is not that every Persian violinist should come to Europe to study to understand something. Obviously, an encounter with someone who has lived Mozart is definitely beneficial. But what I'm trying to say is when you base a language as alive, as living as music on a bunch of books, however credible or numerous they are, then you're going to lose something.
So what you're advocating is for, let's say, more freedom into it, as long as the soul of the music remains beneficial. Let's say the performer could use that and not like use, let's say, already programmed rules by which the system should be running on.
I'm obviously in no position to say, for example, how Mozart should be interpreted. But as someone who has lived through at least one language, one musical language, I know that scholastic approach to music education really doesn't work. My teacher always said this, like, you're writing fugues. It's not a good fugue. Why? I don't know, but it's obvious that you've been taught scholastically. You have to work stylistically. And we said, well, what does it mean? It means come here, work with me for 1 year. As happened in the workshop of that court, that's exactly what happened. Because you don't learn language from books. You learn language through human interactions. No. So about Mozart, really, someone who has lived their life. I don't know, someone like Hanukkah who revolutionized at his time the way to look at, for example, old music, Beethoven or Mozart's music, how to interpret a fortepiano or how to interpret a sforzado or whatever. What happened in him was not that he just came up with the idea like studying something. It was the rediscovering, or maybe, I don't know, retransmitting of the soul of something that he has touched. No? It's not really a bunch of formula you can put together, a bunch of rules that you can put together and make good music, whether in interpretation or composition. In composition, absolutely not.
I think maybe there can be kind of two parallel problems that we may be discussing here. One is the question about of the soul, as you say it. The question about if we follow what comes naturally, or if we follow the intuition about what makes sense in terms of impression and interpretation. And then the kind of other question is, what kind of terminology do we use for discussing it, or what kind of theoretical background do we use when we want to discuss about the practice? Because naturally, as we are human beings, at some point we will start discussing with words, even if that's kind of secondary to the real playing and listening and singing. So this sounds that some of the theoretical concepts that gained value in the modernization of the when the conservatory system was built in Iran, so the theoretical paradigm that was then kind of now taken as the starting point didn't actually fit to describing the essential elements of the traditional music of Iran, but not actually that well to discussing the traditional essentialities of the European classical music either. But it was some kind of hypothetical, more abstract form that didn't fit that well to any of these. This is something I kind of hear from what you're saying, and which I can relate to some extent in the European context. For me, at least, it has been revelating in my adult age to learn more about the various historical traditions in musical practice and music theory, and see how much variety there actually is, and how much sense it actually makes it when you go to look to those words that the composers or performers of certain traditions actually use themselves to describe their own practice. Is this kind of in the line of what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Only the only thing that I need to add is that you mentioned that we human beings need to come up with some words. When we talk, it's not only about the things that we say. It's also about the things that we don't say, no? Now, take this as an example of the transmission of a culture, of a musical language. Well, I as someone who plays piano, have learned music from Jarmo Erikainen. When he just looked at me and he said, "Do this," or when he, I don't know, told me, "Okay, just release and say, these things cannot be categorized or written down in a book, or these are lived music. This is what I call real music, lived music. This is also what I always look for in my own compositions. Like, the music that happens through someone's life and it is breathed in and breathed out. It's the same as, like, I remember, for example, well, I went to Mecca at some point, and there was this imam reciting the Quran, and well, it is quite a scene. I mean, the Mecca, so many people, everybody in white, and then this imam was reciting the prayer, and then he suddenly couldn't continue, and I could tell from his voice that he has a lump in his throat. No? And then he started crying, and then he wanted to continue. He couldn't, but he was obliged to continue. And for me, this is real music. No, and it is so vast, with such great audience, and so original. This little, I don't say that every time that he comes and recites his music. For me, that little sublime moment is music. And this sublime cannot be transmitted by books or rules.
Yeah,
This
I think I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, this sublime is something through that you find everywhere in Mozart playing, in jazz, in anything. As long as you're talking about something that we human beings do as a means to escape the banality of life, however you call it, culture, art, or whatever, craftsmanship, whatever. This is not something that you can transmit with theory.
Actually, this was interesting for me, and try to explain it as concise as you can, because you said in Rondo in 2020 in an interview that I'm annoyed the classification of all Persian music as folk music. It is a 3,000-year-old musical culture from which theoretical texts were written as early as the Middle Ages. So what is, for us people who don't know much about this, what's the difference between folk music and the classical? Well, I mean, you already explained, but is the classical music more standardized in terms of scales, and they don't sound similar at all, or how is it?
They are very closely related, but let's put it like this: the difference between Chardash and Brahms, I think it's obvious, no?
Okay.
Or I don't know, or Bartok. Bartok music cannot be folk, but it has taken elements of folk.
Yes, yes.
In our case, let's say Iran. I always define Iran not only as the borders of the political borders, but the Persian plateau. How do you call it? I don't know.
Well, anyway, go on.
That land from mid Turkey, Iraq to Afghanistan, Tajikistan.
Okay.
All of it as Persian.
So the broader cultural,
culture, yeah,
realm, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you want to learn everything about the Persian music, you need to go to Tajikistan, to Uzbekistan, and find not only music, every art. Yeah, there have been all these folk elements from these different parts of Iran, of the Great Persia, or whatever we call it, that have been gathered somehow and have been put in a kind of form. So it used to be there are things that suggest that like in 3,000 years ago, they were like ritually played for each hour of the day or for each day of the month or the week. So
right.
So they became ritualized. They became a kind of formalized. No. So folk music of today and the classical music of today, the relationship is that classical music of today has the reminiscent of all the old formal music, ritualized music, and the still other folk music put into it, and it has a form. Some people, for example, paragonize it with the Persian house, in which you have a courtyard at the beginning, in the middle, and there are little rooms all around. So the courtyard is like the tonic, if you like, or the tonic region, and then you can go to different new tonics or new modes or everything. And each these little things have been gathered from different parts of the folk music. But so that's the classical thing. But when you go to the folk music, still, I mean, what is remained of the folk music today, it's way more, it's way richer than you can imagine. You can find in any ready folk or whatever, because it's still alive. It's the language. For me, in that sense, classical music is kind of ritualized folk in Iran, or not ritualized, let's say formalized.
More sophisticated.
Yeah, formalized, sophisticated, and then put into an improvisation system, which is very important. Like we have some ways of modulation, and there's
right.
Yeah, and of course there is a kind of an institute to it, no? As classical music has some institute to it. If you take classical music before the 20th century, like these are the main pillars of this institute as classical music. In Western music, you can have it also in Iran.
You were talking a bit before about that, but I might have not caught it. But as we have in Europe orchestras who play orchestra music, opera houses, do you have institutions for Persian classical music with people get paid to play there, I don't know, once a week, once a month, in the same way?
Well, there are different ensembles of Persian classical music, which are active sometimes on and off. Unfortunately, we don't have a state-sponsored one. There was one beginning to be formed, but then it was again.
So in a way, they're treated like, let's say, private bands who make a living by themselves.
There are so many of them, and they are so active. They are so let's say they are thriving in their own way. They all have their own problem of the relationship with the modern world and everything, as I do. I mean, it's the problem of every one of us.
Actually, it would be my follow-up question to this would be that if I understood correctly, in the old times, it was pretty much the courts of let's say the royal power that employed the musicians, and that was the institutions. So how is it nowadays? Is it nowadays that these ensembles still get some support from the government, or does the government use them to their own ceremonies to any extent, or has that kind of just is that connection kind of cut off, so that now they are more on their own, and they have in that sense kind of lost their identity that they used to have in the past?
Well, it's a very good question. The thing is, the nature of Persian classical music is improvisatory, so individualistic. That's why forming an orchestra or a group in itself is a next step. Let's say it's not it's not a step which is inherent in the nature of it. There have been so many good ensembles, even an orchestra of all Persian instruments. Nowadays, there is this state-sponsored so-called national orchestra, which is a symphonic orchestra, and it has also Persian instruments. And I was very happy to see that they have announced a call for score, because now, as a composer, I can see that, well, not only like rudimentary settings of symphonic and Persian music can be played with this orchestra. Actually, some composers can think of the possibility that there is this orchestra and there are also the Persian and other instruments, so we can think of a proper composition.
How about the Western institutions? Do you have orchestras, opera houses, so on? How many, more or less?
Yes, we have one opera house which was built in the previous Shah's time, the king, and it was part of the, let's say, movement which really wanted to take after the Western culture in many senses. In those times, well, this opera house is called Rudaki. It was called Rudaki. Now it's called Baka. If you look at it, it's very much close, like the Vienna opera house.
Okay, okay.
And well, nowadays there are so few operas are performed because opera production is not stately. There are so few opera companies who are making, maybe, I don't know exactly, but I think not more than 10 or 12 opera performances a year. But we also have a symphonic orchestra, which it has been for a few years, it has been quite well established, and now it's going quite well. There have been so many foreign.
So there's like one orchestra.
There is one state.
One state.
Yeah, it's called Tehran Symphonic Orchestra.
Right.
Yeah, that is sponsored by the.
Would you say that because this is also interesting for us to know, like what's the? I mean, you went to concert halls here. You saw people being in concert halls. Like, would you say Iranians are drawn to this Western music, or it's more like a peripheric part of the culture?
Absolutely, there are so many people who are fan of classical music in Iran.
Okay.
I'm telling you, when our inter orchestra, well, we had to play also some classical music so that we could gain more. Not that we didn't want to, I mean, but it was also obligatory for us to put some classical music in our repertoire. Like we played some parts of St. Matthew's, Bach's St. Matthew, and some other pieces. Anyway, in the classical way, not Persian music and and yeah, as I'm saying, well, I was one of the fans from 16. I remember I used to go to concert halls with wow, such a fantastic.
If I may bridge from here to the next point of concern. So obviously the state is funding some orchestras and institutions, but because after the revolution, the religious authorities have kind of total control on the government. Does that affect to let's say to what kind of music can be played in these orchestras or in the opera house, or are they just playing whatever they want to play, or are there some kind of censorship or social control in relation to some music that would be against the Islamic authorities?
The Islamist state, no?
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's call it Islamic Republic as it is. The rules in the cultural ministry of the Islamic Republic are, well, there are some obvious things, like no female solo singer. There could be like some of them together sing, like 2 or 3. It's sometimes a matter of interpretation of the rules. Anyway, yeah, there have been.
Wait, so no female solo singers in like like in a what? Like in a requiem? Or
Yeah.
Well, then how do you do the opera productions? Or there it's okay?
That's the point, because there is this rule. Well, let me think if there is other. Well, there is some rules about how you dress as a woman, which is general.
Yes.
Society. But it's very interesting that, well, okay, we have this rule, but you see, how do we do the opera?
Yeah.
Let me give you this personal anecdote. We played this concert, and it was quite strategic for us. So we invited the head of the highest official in music department of the Ministry of Culture. And he was there with his daughter, and he said, "Yeah, I love Bach. I want to listen to Bach." I said, "Yeah, please." And we had this concert, and then at the end, there was this Ausliebe from some St. Matthew's Passion. It is a couple of English horns and soprano and flute. No? We ended the concert with that, but it was intermingled with another piece, like the other piece, which was kind of contemporary piece, finished like, and then this thing started to come out, and it was supposed to continue this hissing sound of the choir, so that when the lady sings, it would be considered as politically correct. I mean, the choir is singing, they're hissing, but for some mistake, the choir stopped singing. And she was singing alone. And it finished, and then at the end, I was the manager of the orchestra also. He asked me, "Oh, it was very interesting concert, but I can swear that the lady was singing alone."
So basically, you have to invent quite extraordinary ways to kind of come around of these rules.
Society. I can tell you, for example, the other time we performed the Karl Orff's theme.
Carmina Burana, yeah.
And for the solo parts, there were two of the choir members who would not sing, but just
lip sync.
Yeah, and we did it. Well, it was so perfect.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So you see, that's how the reality of a society works. That's what I'm talking about. About the soul of the music, the soul of the society. You know, these are the realities of the. There are some, and also the opera is happening because the opera is considered. The opera is considered legally as a theater, and in theater there is a lot more freedom.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Interesting.
Yeah, these are the nuances that, well, when you get inside the society, you understand.
But otherwise, women have no, like, they can be orchestra members and...
we also have women conductors.
Yeah. We had on this show, like, Nazanin Agahani, who was the first woman to conduct in Iran, and she told her experiences then. That was in 2008 or 9, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So a bit time has passed since then, but how is it now? Like, do you still have female conductors every once in a while, or composers? Is it
Composers? Definitely, a lot of them. Conductors, there was this lady who recently conducted the national. What was her name? Nehzat Amiri, if I'm not mistaken. The national orchestra. I'm not so sure about the details.
Sorry, stupid Westerner question. So if let's say a female conductor comes from Sweden and conducts in Iran, are they expected to also dress in the... Yeah, so you have to behave like everybody else, right?
Not only on the stage, but anywhere. I mean, the code of conduct is you have to have something on the hair. Usually it's just so loose and just for the formality. And the rest of it.
Right.
Nothing. Well, I know it's weird, but nothing. I mean, just come to Iran and enjoy.
But see, we here in Europe, whenever we hear about Iran in the news, we usually hear, okay, now I'm vastly generalizing everything, but we hear mostly bad things, or we hear stuff like these guys are very old-fashioned, and so.
Which is not wrong, but there are other truths.
But if you ask me, if you tell me that a woman can conduct an orchestra, but a woman cannot sing alone next to the orchestra, it's like...
I can explain. I think it takes a few hours, but I can explain.
Okay.
Maybe we won't use the remaining.
We want no. Let's not use.
There have been also very strong efforts from the Women's Society to fight for their right to sing, and there have been improvements. They have convinced a few ayatollahs, not from the state, but like from the clergy, from the that women singing is okay, and it's something as a dynamic movement. We shouldn't see it as a stagnant. Yeah, they want to make it look stagnant, but society is really a beating heart, a giant heart always beating. So it's they are really doing their best, and there are so many courageous women who continue to sing, who continue to give concerts in many different ways, because it's part of the nature of the society. You just can't stop something and say no.
So what is actually your course as a composer or as a musician more broadly? At least you already mentioned about the intervals, so I think you are interested in microtonality. Are you, as a composer, some of the historical tuning systems of the Persian tradition and some of the Western tradition, or are you inventing totally new ones, or what is your approach?
I can say that well, for me at the beginning it was difficult to know on what ground to stand. One problem was obviously this problem of intonation. I was lucky to meet some cellists, namely Francesco Dillon and Nicola Baroni. They are fantastic people who are also have very, very good ear for these nuances and temperament. And he really understood me. They really understood me, and they helped me do my first writing, which was so important. This piece, Guardi Suciu, which was totally based on Persian music, Persian classical music, Radif music. And if I want to be honest, that's the only music I know well. I really love classical music. I really adore so many of the 20th century composers. They have influenced me a lot. Like Sciarrino, I have studied with him. Chelsea really gave me so much courage to write for instruments in a savage way. Or Donatoni has been the backbone of my whole education, because Pavaralla has been a student of Donatoni. In a way, I was talking to a friend saying, I think the relation with the West for me has been like the East for me is the mom, and the West is the absent father.
Nice. Yeah.
So you know he's there, but you don't actually know that well who he is.
And a bad boy, he came, and now I'm looking for.
Well, if we are on this subject, could I ask another hot potato type of question? In the same Rondo interview, well, actually, to tell the listeners, there was an article in a Finnish classical music magazine about there is a certain movement in the United States that thinks that classical music is somehow connected to reinforcing whiteness and white supremacy and so on. And you said in this article, you had a small interview at the end. So I think they were trying to ask people who actually are from cultures that are non-Western to ask what they think about this. And you said that, well, I'm kind of paraphrasing now, that we should be more worried about the dominance of English-speaking music culture to the detriment of Italian, French, and German than white supremacy. Could you elaborate a bit on this, and what kind of... Yeah.
First of all, let me make it clear. I don't mean that, for example, internet and this vast accessibility to knowledge about anything is something bad. Obviously not. But what I can see is the difference in the view of so many people like in Iran who have access to internet and all this, and what I see, for example, in Italy, or what I used to know about classical music and what I came to know, not about classical music only, about anything. The problem was right when I heard about this thing, that the white supremacy in a musical institute, and thinking of Bach and all that as white supremacy. Well, I said, well, if you're trying to remedy something, don't accuse Bach. At least think about this fact that the Anglo-Saxon hegemony, which is a natural hegemony because we are speaking English.
Yes,
That's
yes.
a very good tool we can communicate with. But it is also marginalizing so many precious gems from these places. I know so many fantastic musicians in Italy, who are not known simply because they don't speak English. You can find this in any field, philosopher, people whose work is not in English, or people who you don't find in Google. If you Google, I don't know, there's
Yes.
the Italian composer. There are these websites in English, and you find them. For example,
I can completely relate to that. And I was thinking that there is also many authors that are Romanian who, are important in Romanian. I mean, in classical music or in other fields.
Yeah.
And I mean, they don't have lectures on YouTube. They don't have like a cult following because they wrote in Romanian. So it's not like the whole world is going to read them or listen to them or be interested in their ideas. But that's why we keep going and to the English-speaking musicians and philosophers and authors, because we just can understand their language.
exactly. And let me add this. This thing, as you just mentioned, is really like a race now. Everybody is trying to present themselves, YouTube channel, I am this, I am that. But there are so many of these precious people out there who don't even care about this race. And it would be a pity for the human race just to let go of them and forget them. Just because there is this race and this free market who everyone can buy the attention of people. Okay, do as you want, but there are also these people. I would put my life more on I don't know, saving time to trips to these people's houses than, I don't know, buy 5G modem.
So who are these people? Could you give us some examples?
Well, for instance, this Paolo Aralla, my teacher, he's a fantastic person as a composer. Really would. The problem is he doesn't speak English. I mean, he would be teaching in some high pedigree institute if he spoke English and he had international students, blah blah blah. Well, I was fortunate really not to be able to find a free conservatory in English or in England, or well, I knew English very well, but I saw that okay, I have to learn Italian. And the first time I remember I asked some help from Iran, from him on Skype, and said, "Maestro, can I speak in English?" He said, "Okay, try." And then I started like 5 minutes, said, "Please translate." I tried to start speaking Italian with him.
So you learned it well during the 4 years you were there.
I know well enough to understand what these great people say. Or I don't know. For example, there is this friend of mine who is always supporting me, Roberto Cons. He's a composer, and nobody really knows him. I said once, how about finding? He has a YouTube channel full of music, and he has put his like scores there just for free. I said, how about let's put all these in I don't know, with some label, or let's find some agent. I said, agent? Yes, maybe, yeah. Let's talk about it. So I mean, these are people who are. I mean, I don't. Obviously, there are so many of them, and I can't say that these people who I am saying are the people to go to, but I'm talking for personal experience. But also, just imagine the attention that the likes of Fenihau or Boulez gets, and the attention people like Sciarrino or Franco Donatoni get, or Kurtag, for example. Kurtag, as a person he's simply, I can't imagine people like at this level being at a better level to reach, like to be able to infiltrate into the theory classes, or I don't know, repertoires or whatever. Of course, they are well played, they are well received. But how many people, for example, it's very interesting. So many people here don't know Franco Donatoni, but in the 80s, so many of the great Finnish composers and Esa-Pekka Salonen, like Veli-Matti Puumala, they used to go to Franco Donatoni in Siena, Kijana Academy. But
yes, it's true. I think it's interesting that many of the older generation composers in Finland have actually studied with Donatoni or have contacts with him, but still, I think Donatoni's music is not much played in Finland. I don't recall any time I would actually heard his music in Finland.
I've heard it a few times. I think at least I was in 3 concerts where there was a piece by Donatoni.
Well, you have chosen better
years.
than me, obviously.
Yeah, but in 14 years, I would say he's a pretty important name here. So it's not he's not so unknown.
Yeah, but still, what were these gigs in, let's say, with the radio orchestra or other of the really
those
big
were
ensembles?
contemporary music concerts.
Yeah, so there are 4 more of those who already are connoisseurs.
Yeah, but to be perfectly honest, I mean, there's so many 20th century composers, and I mean, at least the Helsinki orchestras, they can play only that much modern music. So I think if you hear a piece by Donatoni played by the Radio Symphony Orchestra, the next time you're gonna hear it is probably in 20 years. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking that there's many famous people you could be playing, but you also have to play the other repertoire. So, because I think if you play only Donatoni and Boulez every week, people are not gonna come to the concerts anymore.
People are not gonna survive. But now, what I'm saying is just the amount of attention. It depends where you are.
By the way, all the dislikes that we're gonna get for this video are probably gonna come from my previous comment that if you would play Boulez and Donatoni, nobody would come to concerts. But yeah,
well,
let's pretend I never said that.
But I think we are not really speaking here for world that we will just play for two composers, whoever they are. But yes, I think at least I'm interested in seeing a concert world where there are many orchestras with a bit different profiles and bit different tastes, and that every now and then we hear more of those composers that we don't know that much. Of course, not maybe every week, but every now and then that there could be more variety. And I think I think Vahid has totally a point there, that the English language gives some dominance for who it is a native language, or who are well contacted with the native English speakers. So in that sense, I think it could actually be really interesting to make, let's say, a concert series with contemporary music from just non-English speaking countries, and see how it comes. What kind of new gems would we find?
Buddy, you have my support whenever you want to start that. But when you start getting the hate, I will run away. Yeah.
Good to know that, Mate.
Yeah. I mean, we are friends only until, yes. No, but I think it is kind of a double-edged sword in a way. Like on one hand, you have a language that everybody can use and we can understand each other very well. You have a lingua franca, but in the same way, it gives much more doors open to the ones who actually speak that lingua franca very well. And I've had this experience, like no matter how little educated an English native speaker is, you put him next to me or to someone else who's not a native English, that person is going to seem like they know much better what they're talking about than you. Like almost, it's normal in the end.
Actually, I could, in the end, I could still want to ask, now when we're speaking in English, about English, and none of us is a native English speaker, but I think, Vahid, you are the only one of us who has really studied English in an academic level, if I got it right. So what do you think are actually those features of the English language culture? You can put it more specifically if you want, that you think are worth of attention, if the world would be that way, that the lingua franca would be something else. Let's say if we were in a world where Persian was a lingua franca, what would be those things in English that you would still think that would still need the attention?
Many things, and I think they are under English being nonetheless the lingua franca. They are still being undervalued. Like William Blake, for me, is a fantastic person. Is a massive inspiration. He taught me so much. Or I don't know. Obviously, there's so much of English literature that is needless to say, like Shakespeare or Andrew Marvell. I really admire him. Even old English nobody knows about. I mean, if you put old English somewhere and say this is English, they would say, what are these characters? Like Geoffrey Chaucer, I would love to set up some time and do nothing and just read Chaucer, or I don't know, Andrew Marvell or something. But what I'm more concerned about is not the culture, but the representers of culture, or the media, let's say. Something nice comes to my mind. We talked about academism and everything. Boulez says somewhere that academia and academic language has been like a media, like I am paraphrasing. It's been used up so much that it is now saturated and it's no longer usable. In the same manner, I can say the language, I mean, the English language has been used up in such a way that people are saturated. I mean, our minds are saturated with the surface. You know, when you think of the English language, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, the internet. I don't know, some TV show probably, or your favorite, I don't know, newspaper, or if you like something like that. But well, for me, as someone who was fortunate enough to see the pre-internet world, and I started my encounter with the West with these books. I mean, huge books, an anthology of English literature. I would go through them and would cherish every word of it. For us, those were gems, really. So I have no problem absolutely with the English language in itself. In literature, I can say absolutely. In music, if you go to, I don't know, the Renaissance English or Middle Ages, or I don't know, Benjamin Britten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elgar and.
What I started kind of obsessive thinking in your what you were saying was actually about the surface. So maybe it is that when we are all the time encountering something such as English language, we kind of start thinking that we know it, even if we actually don't know, if we just know some of the very surface of it. Whereas if we would really want to know what it is, we would need to go to the source, and we would know to go to the English Renaissance music, and to the old stuff, to understand what the modern surface kind of actually is. So maybe this is part of the problem of the English speaking dominance,
Yeah.
that we don't actually know what we are talking about when we are using many English words. And maybe this is
Maybe
part
you
of the
don't know what
problem
you're
of the
talking about,
saturation.
bro. I know all the time what I'm talking about.
Maybe you are the only one in the world, Mate.
I can say the same thing about the 12 tone equal temperament.
Definitely.
Well, where does it come from? It is obviously a huge achievement in music, in Western music history. But where do you find it now? Everywhere. Commercials, TV commercials, I don't know. Every pop song, everything. Even you find folk music. I just went to some temple and I found this Indian temple. They found
Yeah,
these.
you mean the tempered system, the 12 tone? Yes, because I thought I thought 12 tone system like Schoenberg. And I was like, where are those commercials with Schoenberg music?
No. but we are talking about the equal
Yes,
temperament
yes,
of
yes.
12 tone chromatism. Yeah.
Temperament of the octave. 12 Edo, as they call
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I went to this Indian temple, and there was this harmonium, which is like an organ with a mantle. And it was also in 12 tone. I said, but why? This is supposed to be Indian music. I mean, everywhere. And this is what I call. I mean, obviously, you play Bach and all the giants in this system, but it doesn't have to be taken for granted. It doesn't have to
And
be.
actually, why would you even play Bach with that system? Because the full temperature system of time of Bach was not actually equal temperament of 12 Edo. It was just almost equal temperament of 12 Edo.
That's true. And this overuse of this, and everywhere you find, you go to any composition class, and you want to express yourself, and then they start with this cage, and they put you there and say, okay, this is what it is, take it or leave it. It's really frustrating.
Is it really that way, even in Italy? Like, I can see it is, if you go to the internet and if you see any popular English language website, so they very often say that there is this 12 notes in an octave and da-ba-da-ba-da. But I don't know if, is it really that way in Italian teaching? At least I think in the Finnish tradition, we quite often start from the diatony, or the 7 notes, the diatony, and then kind of the chromaticism comes on top of that. And in the early courses, we don't that much actually talk about the tuning, so that actually.
But you guys are
actually
talking
the tuning
about an ideal
cultures
world.
differ much between, let's say, pianists who really use the equal temperament, and then of the string or wind players who mostly, who go between many systems in the real life.
Sorry, Matei, what were you saying?
No, I mean, you're talking as in an ideal world where we could have instruments that could play all these systems, and we could like.
No, I am talking.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Nilo. Like.
No, I'm not talking ideal world. I'm talking real world. Like, Mate, you don't know because you are a pianist, but I'm a singer and bassoonist, and sometimes when I was a teenager and I had been rehearsing some sonata with just on my own, and then I went to play with a pianist. I was like, oh, why is everything just out of tune all the time?
Yeah, I know.
I didn't understand it that time, but later on I understand it that was because when I had been practicing just on my own, of course I didn't play in equal temperament, and then when I was with a piano, I needed to, you know, to correct my tuning.
What I meant was that, and actually to also what you said about the organ, that was 12 tuned like that. So I'm just thinking that if we want to have ensembles that play together and to go to modulate to 200 tonalities, it's just practical. Yeah, so it's very hard to, let's say, to teach everybody 50 different tuning systems so that they can apply all of them to various instruments and to play together. So that's kind of, that would be the ideal world. But
let me add something to your correct observation. That, yeah, of course, you don't need to. I mean, when you're talking about multiplicity, and there are enormous amount of possibilities, and you would get lost in them. Yeah. But what I'm saying is something else. First of all, I was talking about theory. When you start your theory with a certain number of, let's say, for example, how many types of interval do we have? Like, according to the system, let's forget about even the inversions and so on. We have like 11, 12. Correct me, I'm very bad at math. But that's not true. Well, when you have like when you take the harmonic series and you start thinking about like the peculiar intervals, which are quite different than the common major third, minor second, minor second. For example, the difference between 13th harmonic and 12th harmonic, for me, obvious. Like do, so, la, so, la, so, la, so. This minus 60 cent whole tone is obvious because it's there in our culture, in our music. But when you say that, no, these are the intervals that are there. You can't have more than that. Other than that, it's called microtonal. This is what I don't like, because it's not microtonal. It's like saying Bach's music is microtonal. Even 12 Edo is microtonal because it's outside the harmonic series. We tune it so it's microtonal, microtunal. What I'm saying is that this, when you close an argument by some proposition, by some position, saying that we have 12 notes, then you don't let grow things. You could also let things die, like my expressivity would really die in that sense. Let alone those things like the minus second, which is for me a bit too high, too low. I don't know. For me, one of the hardest things is to write for the piano, which is an instrument I love, and that shows how paradoxical the situation is. But well,
I would just want to ask, like, very quick and just so that we cover more or less everything, because you said that you're listening to Mateusz Passion and you had it in concerts, and what's the relationship between, let's say, composers in Iran and the Shia religion that is practiced there? Like, do people try to compose using religion as an inspiration, or that's a completely separate world?
Well, it is yes and no. I mean, there have been people who have written for religious, at least let's say on religious theme. The religion itself is a very good, the religious practices is a very good fountain of musical inspirations, because there are so many things in the rituals that happen, like the songs, the rhythms sometimes. And there have been composers who really did that. and there are so many people who don't work towards that.
No, but like, would it be appropriate or inappropriate, let's say, for a composer in Iran to take some religious text and turn it into music?
Absolutely not.
No, okay.
I remember once I saw in some chat line, there was this guy, it was some Facebook, and this guy was probably American or something. He said, yeah, some years ago, I wrote a passion based on the story of Christ according to Quran. Do you think if I perform this, Muslims will kill me? And there were so many people convinced that, yeah, don't do this, it's dangerous. And I said, look, if you like, I can introduce you to some, there are some intellectual, less conservative foundations who would actually support or promote these kind of things. I said, if you like, I can ask support from them so that you're not worried about anything. And then there were so many people mocking. So there is this very huge general but a negative aspect of the religion, which I know why it's happening. Obviously, there are so many crazy people out there. It is obvious that people take that kind of impression. But as I told you, there are so many nuances to the truth.
Right.
As far as the religious text being set to music is concerned, I don't think there's a...
Right. Okay. Well, I guess on that note, we could pretty much wrap it up here. Vahid, thank you very much for taking part in our podcast. And Nilo, thank you very much for having co-hosted this. And to everybody, I say, obviously, like, share, and subscribe. Okay? And you can imagine the echo of my voice saying that. And tune into Key Culture Podcast next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Ciao.